Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our live stream, our morning coffee live stream for Friday, September the 11th. How is everyone this morning? Things are very smoky out here in the gorge this morning. I made the mistake of sleeping with my windows open for a bit too long last night, and my hut smells like a campfire. But looking at the news and the reports, it could be a lot worse, and is for many of our friends in on the West Coast, but in particular thinking about friends in the Portland, Vancouver area and Eugene and Southern Oregon, which look particularly bad. So, as I'm fond of reflecting, this too shall pass, hopefully sooner rather than later, but in a number of days, like a stuffy nose, hopefully it'll be gone, and we'll breathe fresh air again and be grateful, hopefully for more than a few fleeting moments. But that darn hedonic treadmill, it's not really that, it's tanha that moves the goalpost, and we start thinking we need something more than that to be happy. We're in the middle of two of the big masses of smoke here, and we've had a couple good days, but I was getting concerned emails and texts from people wondering if we had sufficient masks. So, and we do have a couple, and then we have a couple more on the way, so it'll be good. Just a little newsy thing while people are still getting their stream on here. If you are on our email list, you should have received an email this morning with a summary and directing you to the latest post on our website, pacifichermitage.org. So finally did get a post up about small weekend event coming up towards the end of the month, where people can come out and offer a couple hours, either on a Saturday or a Sunday, or both days if you're really into helping bring in the firewood. So we're going to be moving all the split firewood that Venerable Rikito and Ajahn Sumedho generously prepared, as well as some stuff stored up from previous years to get a good 2-year supply down here near where the Hermitage house is and our wood stove. So preparations for our upcoming winter retreat period. We'll probably have to fire up our wood stove here within the next few weeks and start the fireplace season. So yesterday, walking back from my dentist appointment, my second only foray out of the Hermitage since March, things looked relatively normal for what seems to be a very abnormal year. But on my way back, as I entered the final stretch, walking the gravel road along Jewett Creek, which leads up to the monastery, I crossed paths with someone who was out walking who looked a bit upset, and kind of just out of nowhere blurted a question to me, which I can't quite remember exactly how he phrased it, but it was something along the lines of, do you really believe that people can know the truth and that will save us? Something to that effect. And as I asserted that we can know some very important truths that can indeed save us, it became apparent that he was kind of thinking along a different lines, slightly more worldly sort of consideration. Save the world. And clearly he seemed to be a bit distraught and told me that the September 11th anniversary is a bit of a painful challenge for him. And then there are many other things challenging many or all of us this year. And I think he was feeling the burden of that as well. And we had a bit of a conversation about how to maybe deal with that. Not so sure I persuaded him of the Buddha's truth, because we parted with him saying, well, I wish you well with that. But he seemed clearly distraught at problems that exist out in the world, and especially problems writ large. And it moves me to see people suffering needlessly about this, which is not to say that people shouldn't entertain a certain sense of concern for the problems that exist in the world and in our communities, but the tendency is to spin some very negative stories and to worry about things at a level that we don't really have a great deal of influence upon. In short, we don't really respond to the suffering that's in the world always in a way that avoids creating extra suffering. And, there's many levels to it. I mean, one is a confusion about the human realms. That's the way I put it. And just what this realm is all about. I'm fond of reflecting this is not the heavenly realms, the higher realms. It is not a place of perfection and unending comfort. And if one has faith in the Buddha's cosmology, it never will be. That's not what human existence is all about. And one needs to, whether one believes that or not, I think the skillful and spiritually mature response to the injustices of the world and the suffering that exists in the world is to meet it with a sense of equanimity. Not apathy, but equanimity. And there's a few critical important components to the kind of the kind of equanimity that the Buddha seems to point to in his teachings. One is a clear-sighted understanding of the truth of the way things are. To whatever level we can understand the truth of the world. And if we understand the world sufficiently, and in particular, how things are causally conditioned and arisen, and we appropriately sort of understand what it means to live in the human realm, the dangers, the insecurity, the imperfections, hopefully we can develop a measure of acceptance for it being the way that it is without moving to some negative sort of state of apathy or indifference. And my understanding, reading the Buddha's teachings on equanimity, is it's grounded in a kind of lucid understanding of the truth of the way things are. And rather than a turning away or a dismissing or burying one's head in the ground, it's a clear-sighted knowledge and acceptance of the way things are. And that things exist based on causes and conditions and for reasons. And maybe more importantly is the question of what should one do about it? Is it right? Is it skillful to generate extra suffering, whether it's angst, anxiety, sorrow, depression, or despair, because of the way things are in the world? And it seems clear the Buddha's answer is that's not a skillful response. I think somewhat due to a tendency to react to the experience of dukkha, we look for reasons in the world, and some of the obsession with what's wrong in the world, and also the kinds of fearful, anxious kind of stories that we spin about the world are somewhat misguided and unskillful attempt to explain the kind of maybe deeper unconscious emotional experience of dukkha. We're looking for an excuse or a reason to justify the dissonance of dukkha in our own emotional experience of life. And I think that's part of the attraction to the storytelling and part of the attraction to unwise attention to the fault in others, the fault in the world, in short, what's wrong. But I think one of the ways out of that is to really bring it much closer to home. We don't really need to figure out all the problems of the world. We do just need to ask ourselves the question of what's the most skillful way to respond to the way it is. And when it comes to the problems that exist in the human realm and human relations and human societies, the roots really are present in our own hearts and minds if we haven't yet understood and freed ourselves from the tendency towards greed, hatred, and delusion. And the way they play out and that they're mirrored in the world at large is really just a magnification of that fundamental predicament that beings are not yet wise to and free from those tendencies. And the most efficacious thing to do is to take up some long-term concerted effort to understand that in one's own experience clearly, and to develop the conditions to weaken and overcome those very tendencies in ourself. We haven't yet understood them for ourself, and in our own experience. How well can we really understand how it is that they manifest in the world in the collective of relationships and communities and societies at large? And there's always this dangerous tendency to obsess with the problem out there and not focus on the one closer at home. And we should take great care to undertake that practice, especially if we care to devote time to doing good works and alleviating the suffering that exists out there in the world, because we need to do so with a clear kind of understanding of those tendencies to greed, hatred, and delusion, but also we need to do so fueled with love and compassion and a kind of purity of heart that can only come about through engaging in that work. Set yourself right first before you try to fix the world. And it's not necessarily an all or nothing thing. You don't have to delay that motivation to be of service and to help in the world until you become perfectly and fully enlightened. But one should not neglect that work. And in challenging times, I think it's especially important to be heedful in many ways. And one is heedful in attending to oneself and cultivating well-being in oneself, but also not obsessing about the faults of the world and being very careful about the kind of stories we spin. There's a great deal of humor about what a disastrous or challenging year 2020 seems to be, but one has to, I think, maybe try to keep it on the level of humor without being cold or dismissive, but be careful about the effects of telling yourself stories that just solidify the sort of sense of that being the only reality that's out there. Because that just increases the bias towards and the proclivity towards dwelling on, obsessing about, um, and giving unwise attention to the fault. And that's not a skillful thing to do. So I offer that as a little reflection this morning. Sounds a bit serious and heavy. I don't feel serious and heavy, but sometimes when I reflect in this way, it comes out that way. What are the main differences with how you meditate and the Mahasi technique? Well, I've never studied the Mahasi technique, Eleanor, so one should be cautious about maybe making that comparison on the internet. And do I have a favorite type of meditation? The type that brings me peace. The type that takes me to serenity and clarity. And the breath does a good job of that. Ajahn, how can one strengthen the will versus willpower to incline more towards giving, moral discipline, and meditation? The will versus willpower. Well, when it comes to supporting, developing, giving, virtue, and meditation, the Buddha points to like a cultivation of the good. So, associating with people that are wise and not foolish, devoted to the good rather than devoted to unskillful behavior and unskillful pursuits. But there's an element of faith and confidence in the importance and rightness of generosity, virtue, and the types of mental states that we're trying to cultivate through our meditative efforts. And that's not something that we're just waiting to be given, or that's not maybe something that we just wish we were born with. That's a faculty of heart, faculty of mind that should be cultivated and nurtured. So faith and confidence in these kind of qualities that the Buddha lifts up and praises, and we have to give attention to them. So, and there's different ways we can do that. I mean, part of Sangha, our spiritual community, is to associate with good people and people that share that inclination and that are giving attention to these things and practicing these things and modeling these things. That feeds and nurtures our own faith in these qualities, and that that faith generates the right kind of motivation and the right kind of energy to remember to prioritize these things and to make commitments to developing these things and to be looking out for opportunities to support the movement towards living with generosity, virtue, and the qualities that we seek in our meditative practices. And it's not something that gets a lot of attention in many of the Western forms of Buddhism, but faith and confidence in these qualities and the importance of these qualities is is really at the foundation of the kind of spiritual engine that moves us towards uh, the strengthening of those faculties. So, to find ways to engage with people, talks, readings, study, or just even regular kind of contemplation of the goodness and the power that exist in these kind of qualities. That nurtures and feeds our faith faculty, which acts as a very important foundation for having the energy to keep one focused on and doing the work to develop these things in our life. A lot of vague, unsettled anxiety as the smoke keeps getting worse and the evacuation zones keep getting closer. Yeah, I'm with you, Stan. I felt a little bit of that last night as I caught up on the news. It was pretty late in the day by the time I started catching up on what was going on with the fire and smoke. But one doesn't want to give much space for that anxiety. It's better to do something, even if it's just purifying the mind and resolving that kind of anxiety, but also just making necessary preparations or devoting oneself to helping out where one can. I think it's a special danger of our time that we can just sit home in isolation, staring at our screens and gorging on news and data, which might just end up fueling our anxieties and worries about what's wrong and what could go wrong, or how things could get even worse. It's good to watch out for that and don't spend too much time doing that. Keep yourself informed, but also do something. Any reason to say unsatisfactory instead of unsatisfying for the experience of dukkha? Not that I can think of. I mean, it's maybe more a choice of what resonates with one at some particular time. Part of the challenge or the difficulty translating some of the Pali terms is one word oftentimes doesn't do it full justice. And the word dukkha especially. I don't think there's any one English word that translates the breadth of the meaning of dukkha. One thing, though, Nadine, is unsatisfactory speaks to me. It speaks more to dukkha in I guess, a deeper and objective way. Like it's speaking to the truth of dukkha as a characteristic. It's inherently unsatisfactory. Whereas unsatisfying, when I read that, I can sort of read that in a way where it's just more about my personal experience of something being unsatisfying. And I think the noble truth of dukkha points to this, the characteristic of dukkha that's inherent in that which is conditioned. This is from Kalyani and Joseph. Today's reflection by Ajahn Sumedho, posted on the Abhayagiri website, speaks to the same topic as Ajahn Sudanto is currently talking about. Oh, that's good to know. Thanks for sharing that. I have ADHD and anxiety disorder, so I take medication for this, but I also find a lot of benefit in studying Buddhism and meditating. Is meditation for me discounted due to medication? I'm not sure what you mean by discounted. I have met people before, though, that felt rather discouraged about their ability to meditate, having been diagnosed with ADHD. And I would caution against thinking like that. This meditation really is, in its deepest sort of sense, speaking to some conscious effort to receive whatever the conditions of our mind are and to learn how to resolve unskillful conditions of mind and develop skillful states of mind. So whether you have anxiety or ADHD or some other disorder or mental and emotional habits, meditation, if we think of it in the broadest sort of sense, can only help alleviate that which we want to be free from and help us strengthen skillful and good states of mind. And I think many styles and types of meditation can be of great help for people with ADHD. One, to help just to learn what's going on with the mind and develop a sense of awareness, and also maybe some tools to help develop a little more range and the ability to have a certain type of focus in the mind. And relief from anxiety and an understanding of what goes on with anxiety can also be greatly helped by meditative practice. I wish you all well, and I hope all my friends are safe here on the West Coast, and that I know this too shall pass, but for all of our sake, I hope it passes sooner rather than later. And be careful. You live in a dangerous realm. Spend your time wisely. Look after your mind. Don't obsess about the fault. Just do something. Even if that something is just taking care of one's own body and mind. Just that much is a gift and a step in the right direction. And by all means, if you can help others, please do so. Okay. Be well, friends. We'll have our meditation streams going for Saturday and Sunday, but morning coffee time won't resume until Monday. And currently the forecast says that the smoke problem should be going away by then too for us. So let's hope that's true. Bye for now.